Tabaxi Day, is it?
So what if it is? So what if it is? No. No. Welcome back, fellow meeples, to another episode of Unqualified Experts. I'm your host, Braden Gardner.
Shane, your corrupt overlord.
And today we're going to be talking about two of our favorite races to play in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, the Tabaxi and the Kenku.
In case the opening didn't hint you off at all.
No, not at all. We were super subtle in that intro.
Completely.
These are both races that you can actually find in Volo's Guide to Monsters. These are not going to be found as playable races in the core 5th edition Player's Handbook. So, while this does require a bit of a supplementary addition to a campaign, a lot of the content in here is actually really well fleshed out and great for adding some extra flavor and options for PCs to expand upon for character ideas.
Yeah, Volo's was kind of one of those first guides they added to the main book, and they did a really nice job giving players more options. In our case, I believe it's fair to say that Braden absolutely fell in love with playing the Tabaxi and has it down to an art and a science. And for me, Kenku is one of those races where a lot of people haven't really figured out how to play it yet, because the mimicry seems like a good idea, then it wears off after a session or two, and they're not quite sure how to go about it. And so I'm going to try to give you a very different way of playing the Kenku that it requires a lot of role-playing, but it tends to be really entertaining and really flesh out the character more for you.
And then, in typical Kenku fashion, you can take his ideas and mimic them in your campaign of choice.
Perfect. But Brian, since you have hammered, really nailed down Tabaxi in some hilarious ways, it seems appropriate you should kick this off.
Well, I appreciate that, and I don't see you setting up to go second. So, the Tabaxi, for those who are less familiar, are effectively your catfolk in 5th edition D&D. Yep. The Volo's Guide to Monsters does a really good job of outlining some broad strokes of what to expect when dealing with them. One of the primary things that they focus on is that they're really about the journey and not the destination. Like, they're going to put everything they've got into finding all the information they need to plan out this super elaborate heist for this incredibly rare, interesting what's-it. And once they have it, they'll trade it away without a second thought. It's very cat-like. They're very capricious in their temperament in that way, in that they can be completely focused on a goal, and then once they've met it,
that's enough.
It doesn't really matter. Yep. It's enough. That's sufficient. But there's a little more that you can actually do with that to really kind of flesh out how a Tabaxi plays in a campaign world, whether you're a PC or whether you're playing one as the DM. And a lot of how I've found Tabaxi to be successful is just kind of really getting into the typical mindset of your average cat.
Yeah, and from watching Braden play a Tabaxi over a couple campaigns, these small details really make just such a huge difference. I pretty much busted a gut as his DM when he showed his Tabaxi for the first time, looked at the ranger with a proud hawk on shoulder and said, "Why are you connected with food?" And instantly, a very cat-like thing to think about. The bird isn't a companion, it's food. The ranger is weird from wanting to bond with food. And it instantly set up this kind of immediate tension between the ranger and him. Not in a bad way, but it was entertaining, it was funny. The rest of the table, aka camp, was instantly watching what was going to happen next.
I was just looking. And that's part of the first step to playing Tabaxi well, is you always want to spin a situation so it looks like you are doing this on the moral high ground. You don't... And nothing you do is technically wrong. Now, there are limits to how far you can push that. You don't want to go completely political on that end of the spectrum. But you want your basic actions to basically be unassailable from your point of view, and then present that point of view as though it's fact. The party will still call you out on it, shake their heads, what have you, but if you're eyeballing the ranger or druid's animal companion because they've chosen an avian or a rodent as their familiar or animal companion, you don't want to frame the situation in a way where you're going to hunt that animal down and get it, even though that's totally what your goal is here. You're there just to kind of keep an eye on it uncomfortably long times at a stretch, and then when you're called out on it, I was just looking.
Yeah, you're doing just enough to add that little bit of seasoning. If you've owned a cat, if you've known a cat owner, you know, the cat owns the apartment, it tolerates the owner. That is very much kind of how you could take kind of a Tabaxi type look at things, where, you know, according to the party, you are just another member of the party. But you know that's not the case as a Tabaxi. And you just kind of look at things just a little bit differently. One of the other attitudes I really liked is, aside from the knocking books off the table, which, easy way to garner inspiration playing with a DM like me when you're knocking something off in-game and you just swipe your own books off capriciously like that. Well, do you want to explain your relationship with water as a multi-time Tabaxi player?
Oh, man. So, part of how I've chosen to take Tabaxi is to play up certain cat stereotypes and then just integrate them into my characters. So, for most Tabaxi that I play, water is perfectly fine as a drinkable, but any other application of it, it's gross. Anytime someone mentions going out in the rain, why would I do that? Water's gross. Going for a swim in the ocean, well, I do like the fishes, but water's gross.
Yeah, why take water breathing? Then you have to get in the water. You take water walking and annoy everyone in the party.
Although, I have taken water breathing just because I have such a fear of being caught under the water as a Tabaxi. I refuse to let it conquer me, so immediately after I wake up, the first 10 minutes of my day are spent ritually casting water breathing.
Yeah, and just little details are bringing to life. Every time they set camp, one of the first things Braden asks, can I find a perch? Where is a nice perch? The perch has to be exactly X number of feet off the ground, or my cat person doesn't like it. Like, that is such an attitude of a Tabaxi. It just fit in all these little details added into the character. And it has just a really interesting spice for that type of character class, where sometimes people complain you can't tell the difference between a human and a half-elf character and an elf and a dwarf. You know when there's a good Tabaxi in your party. They don't let you ignore them. And they do it without stealing the entire table.
And extra bonus points for how, when I played Tabaxi for the first time, Shane actually went the extra mile to kind of pick up what I was putting down and built kind of a few cultural things into the Tabaxi city. For example, our heroes are heroes of 10, 100, 1,000 perches.
Yeah. Your adventure, that's how they measured where they adventured. How many great places did you find to sleep on a perch? It was something that made perfect sense as a cat person. A title, Sleeper of 1,000 Perches, for one of their heroes. But it's just those little details that really can bring a campaign to life.
Absolutely. And oftentimes you'll find that you'll have the opportunity to do a lot of improv as a Tabaxi. For example, our party had a wild magic sorcerer, because a party doesn't in this day and age.
Yeah. Why would you not?
Inevitably, when casting, our sorcerer accidentally summoned some Mordrins, which are little box creatures with spindly limbs.
Shiny with wings.
Which in the middle of a critical point in combat where you're supposed to be focused on the battle at hand, you might find your Tabaxi is easily distracted by shiny moving thing. Could be prey, could be treasure.
Yeah, it's
Not
shiny.
sure
It has wings. It could be treasure. It could be toy. It could be food. It could be all of the above. I mean, what a deal.
Precisely. You basically just have to take each situation as it comes and go, how is the Tabaxi actually going to react if I'm playing them like a humanoid cat?
Yeah, and if you have a party that's very adaptable, you may have a wizard who decides, I wonder how the Tabaxi reacts to dancing lights or light illusions. And you know what? It could be a lot of fun as a Tabaxi playing the fool for a bit. You know, you ever seen a cat go nuts on a laser pointer? Suddenly there's a light. It shouldn't be there. What did you call it? Your mortal enemy?
Yes.
It just kept appearing when it shouldn't have been there, and you couldn't catch it.
And the campaign where that was an issue, my Tabaxi was not the sharpest knife in the drawer. So there was a long period of time where finding out what this light was one of the primary quests that I was just obsessed with, to the point where I ended up taking True Sight at the first opportunity to finally see through what was going on. But this had been going on 6-7 levels at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the fun, is the fact that as there were moments you could be a little bit capricious, a little bit very, even slightly annoying as a cat person. You would play the other side too. You would have those moments of just being playful, being the amusement for the group, where after a long battle, let's throw some lights in the corner so the cat person chases it. And it was a nice combination that just brought a lot of life to the campaign.
For sure. And the funny thing is, when I explained that I'm basically just playing up all the traits of a house cat in an intelligent humanoid, naturally one of the party members' responses was to go pet the Tabaxi when they did something good or when they were annoyed with them. So I'd roll a die secretly to see how many pets or scritches they were allowed to get before I just reflexively tried to scritch them back.
Yeah, there was a lot of claw damage on the party because they kept petting high and he kept rolling a 1 or 2.
Or a 0, because I have a d6 that ranges from 0 to 5, which was perfect for this.
And it just, there are so many different details like that. You can pick and choose the ones that really fit your playing style. But it's a really interesting way to make a character come to life, so that, I mean, a lot of times when you choose a race, you have to ask the person, are you a dwarf again, or are you a gnome, or are you a human? You play a Tabaxi really well, and it's just going to be a memorable character that sticks out. And I think that's normally a very positive thing for a campaign, especially when you can play both sides of it. You can occasionally be a bit capricious just to poke them a bit, but you are more than willing to fail that intelligence check to go chase the red light, because you cannot let it keep showing up like that.
This is my territory.
Yeah, you're the hunter, not it.
Yeah, Tabaxi are a lot of fun, but I'm real curious about this Kenku idea that you're toting and getting ready to put forward. So tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, and Kenku is one of those where I love concept ideas. And so I think a lot of people love the idea of a Kenku. You, as a Kenku, you're from a cursed race, you can't fly, but you always kind of desire to. And you lose the ability to speak unless you can mimic. You can perfectly mimic any sound that you've heard before, including a person's voice. Naturally, this makes Kenkus very good rogues, because they can forage, they can mimic a person's voice, and you have to hit a pretty good check to see through their deception, especially if you're playing a Kenku rogue. But the idea of mimicking other people in a party or stuff, it's one of those things that's fun the first session or two. It can get very, very old and very dry very quickly. Not just for the player, but for everyone else at the table. And I think this kind of overlooks something that a lot of us don't necessarily think about with the character development. If your Kenku is like 30, 40 years old, it's had a life up to this point. You don't have to just mimic other people. And nor should you go too far the other way and say you've heard so much speech that you can just talk. That robs you completely of what makes this character special. But if you're willing to do the role-playing, what if you picked up a very good backstory for his life? What if you put 4 or 5 different accents in your head of different people who have been in the Kenku's life? And I think a very interesting way to do this would be maybe he's been trained by a wealthy benefactor. Maybe he was part of a circus. And so when the party asks you a question, as opposed to just trying to mimic a one-word response or do some kind of feathery signal with your hands, you can break into, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all ages, this is the great Poe the Raven in the finest circus of them all. And that's your introduction. That's how you learned your name is Poe the Raven. Was from that. And that is the voice you come out every time someone asks you for a name. So it's not just a mimic of a sound. He says, well, do you know how to adventure? And then after hearing that, they're expecting some type of voice like that again, and you come out with something different. Maybe an aristocratic benefactor. Yes, darling, I will train you in all the finest of the arts so that you will be a fine traveling companion. And you're giving these hints of this amazing backstory that you can keep drawing from while kind of answering the questions. And it gives this really neat way of them figuring out what you're saying, but at the same time, you have to do it in this unique way. You're giving them bits and pieces that they still have to put together to get the answer for the question. And one thing I find really interesting about this, especially if you like stirring the pot a little bit, like I may have been accused of once or twice or every campaign I've ever been in, even the ones I tried to play seriously at first.
You tried to play seriously?
It didn't last long, but the attempt was made. But one of the interesting things is, you may find a Kenku who understands what's going on, but doesn't necessarily understand the social impact of a situation. So you may find yourself coming to a negotiation, and you're kind of, I would say, you're like, hey, I'm gesturing that I want to go to the table. Someone in the party invariably asks, well, can the Kenku negotiate? Do you know how to negotiate? And then you may break out into that benefactor's voice. Darn it, you will listen to this merchant master, for he will teach you the ways of trade. If the party hasn't been gaming with me and doesn't know better, they will give me a chance to then do the negotiation. Which is when you find out he sits down at the table with a nobleman and breaks out, "Ah, you bloody bastard! You know what I think of this deal? Your mother's mouth smells like insult." And you realize the merchant master was a dwarf who cannot use straight language, and the nobleman looks offended beyond belief, while the Kenku believes he's doing an amazing job because he learned to be a merchant master. And so it gives these great situations where you can keep giving these hints of this backstory, and you can have a few phrases you go back to, like when you're especially happy or proud. And yet you can have these misunderstandings of the social situation that just allow the DM to cause chaos with your group. And it does require a lot of role-playing. You have to know the backstory. You have to have some voices ready to go. I probably recommend having 10 or 20 phrases that you come back to that they know are kind of a general referral to a certain answer or situation. But it gives you the opportunity to have a lot of fun. And if you're midway through a campaign and you've ever had the thought, oh, this would have been a perfect addition to a backstory, you're a Kenku. You can't just tell them your backstory. So you can just add in a few new voices when the opportunity comes. And for the DM, this can be a lot of fun too. Suppose just as a joke, I threw in, Spanish, ¿Cómo estás? Muy bien, gracias. And GM can just decide, okay, fine, that's draconic. And you have the draconic paladin, the DM, as a DM, I might have a draconic paladin look at the group and say, I don't believe your companion thinks that means what he thinks it means. And now you're not sure how you offended him, but there's this interesting tension in the group all of a sudden. And it just brings a lot of fun to it. It requires almost a DM level of work prepping as a player. But man, you're not annoying people with the same sound over and over. You have this rich backstory. And it's such an interesting way to build this life, because remember, your character has a backstory. He doesn't only have to mimic the people in camp, Although if you have a particular fur bulk at the table who's really annoyed by Kenku, it can be a lot of fun. Just speaking from a past campaign. But it gives you that ability to paint these bits and pieces of a backstory. So it's almost like an extra little puzzle for the group to put this together as you are playing this in this really unique and different way. And you're still playing it true to the book. You're not talking, you're mimicking from people in your past. And you're explaining how you got these skills through the way they addressed you. And it allows you to address yourself in the third person a lot, which also can bring up some more of those entertaining misunderstandings. Or just those little extra things to remind people that, hey, you're a Kenku, you're a little bit different than your average player. And I think that just adds so much spice into a campaign.
Could you imagine doing that as a bard and having dwarven sea shanties, beautiful elven song pieces,
yep.
and body tavern brawl pieces?
Exactly, and I think that method of play, because when you think Kenku, you think rogue, and for good reason. They get extra decks, they can forge, they do all this stuff. But, bards are troublemakers too, in case you've never played with one, although I think we all have. They're delightful. But this also does open up just that, the ability for a Kenku to walk into a bar, whether it's in a dwarven city or a sailor town, and he can be the body guy who suddenly sings these beautiful songs for nobility, or he can go very much the other direction. Or he can not understand the social implication and mix them up. And I think it opens up so many doors, because you're not just mimicking a line here or a line there, but you are pulling back on all these experiences, and it can just be endlessly entertaining. It may be one of those where if you were in the long D&D sessions, you may be very tired at the end of a good session, but man, you're going to make some memories for yourself and the other people at the table.
For sure. That seems like something that would be super memorable, and something that, as someone who games in a lot of the same circles you do, something I might have to be concerned about in the future.
Maybe just a little bit. And so, I think anything that brings a little bit of extra spice to a campaign can be a really positive thing. And so, we're going to cover some more of these groups, but what do you guys think? Have you ever played a Kenku in a different way that really caught the attention of the table? Do you have a great Tabaxi story about when the cat ruled the day? We want to hear about them. So, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, which I assume is right here. Or if Braden's being a jerk in editing, it's probably right here. But here or here, it's... Please subscribe. Tell us what you think. We always love hearing those stories. And until next time, everyone have a wonderful day.
Thanks for watching.
Yep. If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.